Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is Explanation of Battle Through the Heavens episode number 154 based on novel. So let's start. Yarrow Larrow looked towards the spot where 9th and 8th Tianzuns had disappeared. A moment later, Yarrow Larrow finally withdrew his eyes. He glanced at the distant experts but did not pay much attention to them. He turned around and landed beside Xiao Yang. His brows were involuntarily knitted slightly when he saw the mess within the Star Realm. Although he had stopped the attempt of the Hall of Soul to destroy the faction, the Falling Star Pavilion had also lost some disciples to death. If it is not because I have just advanced to a Bansheng and my foundation is unstable, I would have buried those two with everyone who had died. Yarrow Larrow sighed. His tone had some murderous intent surging within it. Teacher need not be concerned about it. If it is not because of your intervention today, it is likely that the Falling Star Pavilion will really suffer from a great calamity today. Xiao Yang smilingly said. It is all thanks to you. Otherwise, forget about Bansheng, even recovering to my peak strength would be extremely difficult. Yarrow Larrow smilingly said. His smile was quite a happy one. Old fellow, congratulations. During the time that Yarrow Larrow was chatting with Xiao Yang, Feng Zunja had also led the others to swiftly rush over. He cupped his hands towards Yarrow Larrow from a great distance away and said. Yarrow Larrow smilingly shook his head. He spoke softly, give instructions to take care of the mess. It is likely that the Hall of Soul will not dare to easily come and attack again. Feng Zunja nodded. With an elite Bansheng present, it was likely that the Hall of Soul would also understand that it was pointless for an ordinary expert to come. When it came to a Bansheng class expert, it was likely that even the Hall of Soul could not simply dispatch them as it desired. Quite a number of spies from various factions has come today. Perhaps it would not be long before news that you have reached the Bansheng class spreads throughout the Central Plains. This is not a bad opportunity. With you around along with your reputation as the top alchemist in the continent, it is likely that some of the old demons with some friendship with us will not reject our invitation. Feng Zunja voiced his thoughts. Yarrow Larrow nodded slightly. The foundation of the Falling Star Pavilion was too shallow. Even amongst the 4 pavilions, it could be considered to have been founded for the least amount of time. Although he had currently advanced to a Bansheng, there were not many experts in the pavilion who could hold their own. One must not lack such characters if one wished to strengthen a faction. Fortunately, Yarrow Larrow was currently not only a Bansheng but also held the title of the top alchemist in the Central Plains. This was an incomparably glittering golden nameplate. As long as word was spread, it was likely that quite a number of genuine experts would take the initiative to come. At that time, the Falling Star Pavilion could truly be considered to be strengthened. After the withdrawal of the Hall of Soul, the Falling Star Pavilion, which had experienced an intense big battle, gradually became peaceful during the subsequent days. During this peacefulness, the Central Plains had turned into a great uproar because the Falling Star Pavilion had produced a Bansheng. Everyone understood what an elite Bansheng represented. This kind of expert was something that even the Pill Tower did not possess on the surface. On just this point alone, it was sufficient to greatly brace the reputation of the Falling Star Pavilion. This was especially the case when everyone knew that this elite Bansheng was also the top alchemist on the continent. This kind of reputation was magnified limitlessly. Hence, the Falling Star Pavilion had suddenly become lively after 3 days of peace. The leaders of various factions and some experts from the older generations flocked over. Countless number of people came to visit every day. This scene was a completely different one from how their doors were empty in the past. Amidst this liveliness, some experts, who once had some relationship with Yarrow Larrow and Feng Zunja, also finally accepted the invitation to become a guest elder of the Falling Star Pavilion. Although this name was a little empty, they were indeed pulled onto the same boat as the Falling Star Pavilion. While the entire Falling Star Pavilion was busy and lively, Xiao Yang did not participate much in the activities. He had never liked this kind of interaction. Hence, after the day the Hall of Soul retreated, he had chosen to undertake a retreat in the stone tower at the back mountain to train. Although with Xiao Yang's age, he was already considered to be the outstanding amongst the outstanding people of his generation by being in possession of such a strength, it was insufficient to satisfy him. With his increased interaction with the Hall of Soul, he also began to increasingly sense just how terrifying this faction was. A 2-star Do Zun strength did not provide him with the qualification to fight with them. Although the Falling Star Pavilion was becoming stronger under Yarrow Larrow's management in order to become Xiao Yang's firm support, Xiao Yang also understood that there were some matters that he still had to rely on himself. Hence, he did not dare to be lazy when it came to training. Xiao Yang, who was seated on a stone platform at the top of the stone tower, slowly exhaled a breath of air. His shut eyes were also slowly opened. A smile surfaced on his face when he sensed the surging Do Qi that filled his body. Have you awakened? The smile had just appeared when a warm laughter sounded from the side. Xiao Yang turned his eyes, only to see Yarrow Larrow standing at the stone window of the stone tower with his hands behind him. His face was full of smiles. Teacher, why have you come? Xiao Yang was startled when he saw this. He hurriedly stood up and greeted him. Old Feng is better than me when it comes to those matters. Like you, I do not really like such things. However, after suffering the loss from last time, I must establish a sufficiently strong faction this time around, regardless of how I dislike it, Yarrow Larrow smilingly said. Xiao Yang smiled. He appeared to have recalled something and his finger rubbed the dark black ring. After which, he took it off and tossed it towards Yarrow Larrow. He said, Teacher, since you have already revived, it is time that this thing returns to its owner. Yarrow Larrow was startled when he saw the dark black ring that drifted in front of him. A yearning emotion was revealed in his eyes. His finger rubbed the ring. A moment later, he said, all the things that teacher has learnt in my life have been completely left behind in this ring. The current you has likely already learnt most of it. From a certain point of view, you have already reached the qualification to leave teacher. Keeping these things will indeed no longer be of much use to you. Yarrow Larrow wore the black ring on his finger. Immediately, he changed the topic and laughed. However, there is something that is of great use to you. Yarrow Larrow's finger gently pressed the dark black ring after his words sounded. A cluster of dense white flame slowly curled and rose. Finally it was suspended in front of Yarrow Larrow. It was surprisingly the bone-chilling flame. Teacher. Xiao Yang was startled when he saw this. You practice the flame mantra. The heavenly flames are even more important to you. Now that I have advanced to a ban sheng, this bone-chilling flame is no longer of much use to me. Yarrow Larrow's gentle eyes looked towards Xiao Yang as he said. Teacher should stop fooling me. Now, I am no longer that ignorant youth from back then. It is impossible for me to take this bone-chilling flame. Xiao Yang smiled bitterly and shook his head. A heavenly flame is definitely a powerful weapon for an alchemist. Even though Yarrow Larrow had become a ban sheng, possessing the bone-chilling flame would be like adding wings to a tiger. The so-called no longer of much use was complete nonsense. Yarrow Larrow helplessly shook his head when he heard this. His heart said that this young fellow was no longer that greenhorn from back then. However, this did not cause him to abandon his decision. Immediately, he ignored Xiao Yang and gently placed his finger on the cluster of bone-chilling flame. The latter immediately trembled intensely. A moment later, the shaking ceased. A paleness surfaced on Yarrow Larrow's face. Little fellow, I have already removed the spiritual imprint in the bone-chilling flame. However, this bone-chilling flame had been refined by me for many years. Even though the spiritual imprint had been removed, it will still possess quite a great resistance to you. Therefore, you will not be able to use the flame mantra to refine and swallow it for a short period of time. Otherwise, it is likely that you will incur its backlash. Yarrow Larrow's hand gently rubbed the bone-chilling flame. After which, he smiled slightly. He flicked his finger and the latter gently drifted towards Xiao Yang before being suspended in front of him. You should plant your spiritual imprint into it now and properly keep it within your bod. When it no longer possess any resistance towards you, you can merge with it. Xiao Yang's eyes turned a little red as he looked at the cluster of dense white flame in front of him. This bone-chilling flame should be something that had accompanied Yarrow Larrow for a long time. Yet, he had personally removed the spiritual imprint at this moment. With your current strength, you will perhaps not see an overly terrifying leap in strength even if you swallow it. A heavenly flame of the bone-chilling flame ranking might be a little inadequate for you. Yarrow Larrow was somewhat regretful. Immediately, he urged, all right, quickly plant your spiritual imprint. Xiao Yang laughed bitterly. Now that things was like this, he was not allowed to reject any longer. All he could do was to shut his eyes. His finger touched the dense white flame and a trace of spiritual imprint moved along his finger before slowly entering it. With the invasion of the spiritual imprint, the bone-chilling flame initially emitted some resistance from within it. However, it was currently without an owner. Hence, after a brief resistance, the resistance began to scatter. Xiao Yang's spiritual imprint was also successfully planted into it. The bone-chilling flame shook when the spiritual imprint was successfully planted. It swiftly turned into a fire glow that entered the pale white fire seal between Xiao Yang's brows. Xiao Yang immediately felt a warm feeling being emitted from his brows when the bone-chilling flame entered his body. If he carefully sensed it, he would discover that the bone-chilling flame merely lingered between his brows. It did not show any signs of entering his veins and gathered together with the 3000 lotus heart flame. Clearly, its resistance was the cause. Xiao Yang was indifferent to this. Such a resistance would disappear sooner or later. It was only a matter of time. That's right, have you gathered all the ancient maps for the purifying demonic lotus flame? Xiao Yang was depressed when this was mentioned. He shook his head and said, ever since I obtained that piece from the Black Corner region, I have not gained anything else. The purifying demonic lotus flame is too mysterious. Even I have never seen it. If it is possible to obtain a heavenly flame of this rank, the help it could provide you was far from what the bone-chilling flame could compare with. I will do my best to help you inquire about it during this period of time, Yarrow Larrow voiced his thoughts. Xiao Yang nodded slightly. Oh, that's right. There is an acquaintance who have come to the Falling Star Pavilion to look for you. Do you wish to meet her? Yarrow Larrow suddenly seemed to have recalled something. His expression was suddenly a little strange as he said, Who? Xiao Yang was startled when he saw this appearance. Nalan Yanran. Hearing this name, Xiao Yang frowned slightly. Given Nalan Yanran's character, she would likely not come looking for him for no reason unless something has happened to Yun Yun. A beautiful figure was seated on a chair in a somewhat restrained manner within the hall. The lady was wearing a pale green clothes. Her lovely body with alluring curves appeared extremely enchanting while being wrapped under her clothes. However, that pretty face appeared a little haggard when compared to the past. Those beautiful eyes of hers would repeatedly sweep outside of the hall when she picked up a teacup. Creak. While she was sitting uneasily, the tightly shut door of the hall was slowly pushed open. Immediately, a familiar young figure slowly walked in. Nalan Yanran's pretty eyes watched the young man, who had pushed open the door and entered. A complicated emotion flashed across her eyes. She had naturally heard about the matters regarding Xiao Yang in the Central Plains during these years. No one could expect that the latter would actually be able to do extremely well for himself within this Central Plains that was filled with many experts after they separated at the Heavenly Mountain Blood Pool back then. Although her heart possessed some unknown bitterness, Nalan Yanran quickly suppressed it. The current her was also no longer that sentimental girl from back then. She was clearly aware of just how big of a gap she had with Xiao Yang now. All the various arrogance of hers in the past was completely useless in front of this man. Are you well? You had already left when I came out from the Heavenly Mountain Blood Pool back then. Xiao Yang walked into the hall. He looked at the haggard face before sighing in his heart and softly asked. I had something to do back then. Therefore, I was unable to stay. Nalan Yanran nodded. For some unknown reason, her heart actually felt a little anxious when she spoke with Xiao Yang. This kind of anxious likely originated from their current status and strength. The matter of a Ban Sheng appearing in the Falling Star Pavilion had already spread wildly in the Central Plains. Although an expert of this level was extremely distant to Nalan Yanran, she still understood the meaning of this level. Even if one did not mention that the Ban Sheng was Xiao Yang's teacher, just Xiao Yang's current strength alone was sufficient for he, who had relied on the strength from the Heavenly Mountain Blood Pool to luckily break through to the Dozone class, to look up to. I think that something has happened for you to come to the Falling Star Pavilion to look for me this time around, no? Xiao Yang's heart had some kind of unknown feeling when he saw Nalan Yanran's somewhat uneasy manner. This lady in front of him should originally be the woman who would accompany him for his entire life. However, they had ended up nearly becoming strangers. Nalan Yanran's hand was tightened when she heard this. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. I wish to ask you to help teacher. As expected. Xiao Yang's heart also beat slightly when he heard these words. His gaze was focused as he softly said, Speak clearly. That woman, who was once the most noble person in the Jiomar Empire and was the first to have a fascinating ambiguous relationship with him, ultimately possessed quite a great amount of weight in Xiao Yang's heart. Back then, he was enemies with the Misty Cloud Sect. Being the chief of the Misty Cloud Sect, she was caught between the two of them. That pain from having to choose was something that only she was clearly aware of. After which, Xiao Yang had returned and destroyed the sect, which had groomed her. Originally, she ought to hate Xiao Yang. In the end, however, she chose to go far away and leave the empire that gave her bitter memories. Following his current maturity, Xiao Yang, who had lost the vigor from back then, had also gradually understand some of the pain she had felt. There was a vague heartache and apology in his heart. She had never appeared during these years. Although Xiao Yang understood that she, who was in the Central Plains, had definitely heard some rumors about him, she had never come to find him. This seemingly strong woman, who had a weak heart, appeared to be only able to use this method to escape from the pain that was hidden deep within her heart. I have acted on my own and come. Originally, teacher does not allow me to come and look for you. Nalan Yanran laughed bitterly. Xiao Yang nodded slightly. He was not surprised about this. Given Yun Yun's character, even if she really ended up meeting any trouble that she could not settle, it was likely that she would not come and look for him. This woman was stubborn to the point it gave one a heartache. I should have told you the last time. Soon after teacher and I have arrived at the Central Plains, we ended up joining the Flower Sect, Nalan Yanran slowly explained. This sect is a little unique. It only accepts females. Moreover, it does not possess a strong aggression like the other factions. If one was to describe it, it was just Hermit Sect. Xiao Yang greatly agreed with this point. Compared with the Profound Sky Sect, which was one of the two sects, the Flower Sect did indeed keep a much lower profile. We have joined this sect only because teacher liked the atmosphere there. Therefore, she took a guest elder position. Teacher and I stayed there for a prolonged period. Originally, if no accident occurred, someone like teacher and I would not stir much ripple within the Flower Sect. After all, with our strength, we can only be considered average within the flower sect. A bitter smile also surfaced on Nalan Yanran's face when she spoke until this point. She continued, this situation had likely started on the second year after Teacher and I joined the flower sect. At that time, Teacher and I found a mountain within the territory of the flower sect to stay. Normally, no one came to visit us. Originally, the both of us also thought that the two of us were the only ones on the mountain. However, who could expect that Teacher would find a cave when she was randomly roaming around? There was an old woman with crippled legs within the cave. Some fluctuations also rose within Xiao Yang's eyes when he heard this. The temperament of this old woman was tricky and strange. She directly used her hand to strike Teacher and sent her flying after discovering her. Teacher had suffered some injuries because of this. However, she was not only not angry but had even delivered food to that old woman every day. This delivery lasted for 2 years. After 2 years, that old woman was finally willing to leave the cave. She stayed together with us for a year. Xiao Yang laughed bitterly and shook his head when he heard this. Delivering food for 2 years. To think that Yun had actually managed to think about it. Just how kind must a person be in order to do this? After that old woman had lived with us for 1 year, her temper became much better. At that time, we were finally aware that she calls herself Granny Hua. However, we were uncertain of just what she does. Moreover, we did not discover that she was an expert, Nalan Yanran sighed. However, this old granny did not seem to be able to live for long. She had reached the end of her life after having lived with us for a year. However, when she was about to reach her limit, she used a strange technique without explaining anything to seal all of her do qi within Teacher's body. Moreover, she even gave Teacher a jade tablet and asked her to become the chief of the flower sect. Nalan Yanran raised her head to look at Xiao Yang, who had opened his mouth when she spoke until this point. She laughed bitterly. Do you find it bizarre? We also felt that it was incredulous at that time. Teacher had personally examined this Granny Hua when rescuing her. There was not the least bit of do qi within the latter's body. However, from the performance of Granny Hua on her last day, she was obviously an extremely powerful person, whose strength is at the peak of the Dozun class. Xiao Yang's mouth moved. By randomly finding a place to stay, one actually ended up with such a lucky encounter. What was called fortune? This was fortune. Compared to this, Xiao Yang, who had trained bitterly, could just find a rock and knock himself to death. Teacher was quite helpless in the face of this kind of sudden situation. However, she was not interested in being the whatever chief of the flower sect. Therefore, after having buried Granny Hua, she continued to stay at that place. Who could have expected that the acting chief of the flower sect would actually suddenly appear half a year ago and ask Teacher to hand over the chief's jade tablet? Teacher did not wish to be meddlesome. Therefore, she handed the jade tablet over after some thought. In the end, that woman had come looking for us soon after obtaining the jade tablet. This time around, she wants the do qi of Granny Hua that was sealed within Teacher's body. A fury surfaced on Nalan Yanran's face when she spoke until this point. Clearly, she was extremely furious towards this woman who wanted a foot when given an inch. What strength does this chief of the flower sect has? Xiao Yang asked. She is only the acting chief. However, she also possessed the strength of a 4-star Dozun. However, the one who is troublesome to deal with is not her. Instead, it is her male companion. Yaohua Liangjun. This person possessed the strength of a 6-star Dozun. Nalan Yanran helplessly said. A 6-star Dozun her. Xiao Yang's finger gently tapped on the table. The flower sect was indeed worthy of being one of the 2 sects. A 6-star Dozun could be considered quite great even in the entire Central Plains. Yun has obtained the inheritance of that Granny Hua, but she is no match for the 2. Xiao Yang spoke with some surprise. How can Teacher refine that enormous amount of do qi within a short period of time? Nalan Yanran laughed bitterly and said. Currently, that seal has already merged into Teacher's body. If one takes it out, it will definitely take Teacher's life. That evil woman clearly intends to take Teacher's life. Fortunately, it seemed that Granny Hua has arranged something when she was still alive. Hence, quite a number of elders are standing on Teacher's side. Hence, that woman don't dare to forcefully snatch it. However, she had already issued a bet and wished to have a match with Teacher. It should originally be considered fair if it is a match. However, the flower sect possess a kind of strange rule. The rule is that a man and woman can fight an opponent together. In other words, that woman can fight together with Yaohua Liangjun. Nalan Yanran laughed bitterly. Fight together? Xiao Yang knitted his brows slightly when she heard this. A 4-star Dozun and a 6-star Dozun. This was really bullying. Teacher has already agreed to this match. I think that she had become irritated from being constantly pestered. Does she not have a brain? Xiao Yang involuntarily cried out furiously. Was this not delivering oneself to die? Nalan Yanran sighed softly. Her pretty eyes looked at the young man in front, whose face contained a trace of anger. She said, therefore, I can only secretly come and look for you. If you do not intervene, teacher will likely end up dying this time. Therefore, please help teacher, alright? Xiao Yang slowly sighed when he heard Nalan Yanran's weak voice that was pleading. He asked in a deep voice, how long more is there until the match? Half a month. Half a month, huh? Xiao Yang knitted his brows slightly when he heard this. It was likely that it would take over 10 days for one to hurry from this place to the Flower Sect. From the looks of it, it seemed that he was a little pressed for time. Is that sect chief the only one in the Flower Sect who oppose Yun? What about the other experts? The Flower Sect can be considered a big faction with a long inheritance. The sect definitely possess quite a strong foundation. If the entire Flower Sect cannot accept Yun, it is likely that the other party will not take it lying down even if this trouble is settled unless one leave this sect. The Flower Sect does indeed possess quite a strong foundation. However, most of the true experts from the older generations spend their time in continuous retreat. If these older generations' experts are still in the sect, that woman would not be the one becoming the acting sect chief. As for the other elders, most of them are loyal to Granny Hua. They will naturally not have any objections to Granny Hua testaments. The only problem is that woman, Nalan Yanran explained. This is the case, her. Xiao Yang nodded slightly. His expression warmed a little. If that woman is the only one who oppose, it would be easily to resolve the matter. Just go if you wish to. An elderly voice was suddenly transmitted over when Xiao Yang was in deep thought. Yarrow Laro's figure had appeared on a chair beside him at some unknown time and spoke smilingly towards him. Teacher. Xiao Yang was startled when he saw this. Immediately, he nodded. This matter was related to Yun. He would naturally be unable to shrink for it. Regardless of what the case was, he must make a trip to this Flower Sect. Nalan Yanran by the side became restrained when she saw Yarrow Laro. The current her was already aware of the reputation and status that Yarrow Laro possessed in the Central Plains. It was only natural for her to feel a little uneasy in front of such a big shot. It is unexpected that even that old woman Hua Yu has reached her limit. Yarrow Laro glanced at Nalan Yanran before sighing quietly and said. Xiao Yang was startled upon hearing Yarrow Laro's sigh. Immediately, he understood that this so-called old woman Hua Yu was the mysterious Granny Hua that Nalan Yanran spoke of. Immediately, he asked in a surprised manner, does teacher know her? This old woman became famous on the Central Plains much earlier than me. She could also be considered an extremely exciting and great person. Back then, I had the opportunity to meet her a couple of times. She is haughty and possess many opponents. As for her crippled legs, it should be something that have happened after my incident. It is likely that she has suffered an extremely serious injury. Otherwise, her end would not come so quickly. Yarrow Laro nodded. Immediately, he smilingly said, however, that Yun is also considered quite fortunate. She is actually able to obtain the inheritance from this old woman. This old woman has never accepted any disciples all her life. Her character is eccentric and does not trust anyone easily. However, that Yun is able to obtain her trust. It must be said that she is a determined and blessed person. The Flower Sect possess many experts. That acting chief is not a cause for concern. With your current strength, it is not difficult to deal with her. The one who is a little more troublesome to deal with is her male companion Yarrow Liangjun. However, I think that you should be able to deal with it. Yarrow Laro smiled. He flicked his finger and a cream-white jade tablet flew towards Xiao Yang. This is a spatial jade tablet that I have created. Should you meet with a situation that you cannot handle, you can shatter it. I will hurry over as fast as I can. Some of those old fellows from the Flower Sect owes me a favor from back then. Once you say my name, it is likely that they will not make things difficult for you. Xiao Yang immediately sensed the vast and mighty spatial strength within the jade tablet when he received it. A surprise flashed across his eyes as he nodded towards Yarrow Laro. Qing Lin and I shall head over this time around. Tian Huazunja and Little Fairy Doctor are all undertaking a retreat and training. It is not nice to disturb them. Xiao Yang hesitated before speaking. In any case, with his current strength, he would be able to successfully escape even when meeting a 7-star Dozun expert. Moreover, Qing Lin might only possess the strength of a 1-star Dozun, but after summoning the ancient heaven serpent spirit, she possesses a great strength that could fight against a 6-star elite Dozun. It is better for Tian Huazunja to remain here. I am thinking of a way to allow him to regain his peak strength. Although you have helped Little Fairy Doctor refine a poison pill, the true strength of Little Fairy Doctor's woeful poison body has also yet to be completely unleashed. I will aid her during this period of them. The next time you return, it is likely that you will see the strength of these two soaring, Yarrow Laro smilingly said. That is good. Xiao Yang also spoke joyously. With Yarrow Laro acting personally, it should not be difficult for Tian Huazunja to regain his peak strength. On the matter of how to unleash most of the woeful poison body's strength, Xiao Yang would naturally be unable to compare with the incredibly experienced Yarrow Laro. If it is possible, Help Yun Yun become the chief of the Flower Sect during this trip of yours there. The Flower Sect is extremely powerful. If she is able to become the chief, the Falling Star Pavilion will also gain another reliable ally. Xiao Yang's voice had just sounded when a weak ant-like voice suddenly sounded beside his ear. His eyes were lifted, only to see Yarrow Larrow moving his lips. Immediately, he nodded with a bitter smile. Ever since the Misty Cloud Sect was forcefully disbanded by him back then, Yun Yun had been resistant towards something like being the chief of a sect. Who could tell whether she will be willing to become the chief of the Flower Sect? All of you should also get moving. There is not much time left. After seeing Xiao Yang nodding, Yarrow Larrow smiled, waved his hand and said, "Understood." Xiao Yang nodded. He turned around and walked out of the hall. Nalan Yanran behind bowed respectfully to Yarrow Larrow before hurriedly followed. After leaving the hall, Xiao Yang looked for Qing Lin. Subsequently, he ceased remaining any longer as he got Nalan Yanran to lead the way. The three of them hurried to the Flower Sect without stopping. The Flower Sect was located towards the western region of the Central Plains. There was quite a distance between it and the Falling Star Pavilion. Even with the speed of Xiao Yang Trio, it was likely that they would need over 10 days to reach it. Fortunately, Qing Lin had summoned an expert from the 9 Serene Deep Ground Python tribe after having left the Falling Star Pavilion. Finally, she ordered him to transform into his actual body. The three of them rode on it. Only then did they avoid the bitterness from rushing about. An enormous black body shuttled through the clouds in the distant sky. When the enormous body twitched, a wave of low and deep rushing wind sound would appear. Xiao Yang sat on the back of the snake. Although the body of the 9 Serene Deep Ground Python was covered with icy cold slippery scales, his body did not even move a little. Wild wind rushed past his ear, but his hair did not even make the slightest movement. At this moment, Xiao Yang had his eyes tightly shut. His mind had sunk deep into his brows. The bone-chilling flame was slowly emitting an unusual temperature at that spot. It was different from the other flames. This kind of flame would give one an extremely icy cold feeling. However, within this icy chillness hid a wild and violent hot energy. These two opposing energy merged perfectly together, causing one to involuntarily praise the mysteriousness of this world. Xiao Yang's brows was where his spiritual strength lingered. However, it was fortunate that Xiao Yang had already planted a spiritual imprint into the current bone-chilling flame. Hence, the mysterious temperature did not bring about any discomfort to Xiao Yang's soul. Instead, it caused his spiritual fluctuation to become increasingly lively. The bone-chilling flame burned fiercely. That white fire seal between Xiao Yang's brows was also emitting a slight light. At this moment, he was continuously and slowly merging his spiritual strength into the bone-chilling flame. This heavenly flame had been refined by Yarrow Larrow for many years. Even though Yarrow Larrow had already removed his spiritual imprint, the flame still had some vague resistance towards other souls. What Xiao Yang needed to do was to gradually allow the bone-chilling flame to get used to him, his new owner, and resolve the resistance. Originally, this should be a process that exhausts a great amount of time. However, the first attempt by Xiao Yang to strengthen the familiarity between the two, he suddenly discovered that the bone-chilling flame's acceptance towards him had far exceeded his expectation. On top of causing him to be surprised, it also gave him great joy. Xiao Yang only needed to think for a moment before understanding this kind of transformation. When Yarrow Larrow was captured back then, he had sealed the bone-chilling flame within Xiao Yang's body. The latter had also gained control over it. After being together for all these years, Xiao Yang could actually also be considered the second owner of the bone-chilling flame. Currently, this second owner was advancing to become the main owner. The familiarity between the two would naturally soar swiftly. According to this speed, Xiao Yang guessed that he would be able to use the flame mantra to refine the bone-chilling flame very soon. This kind of speed, perhaps even Yarrow Larrow would not have expected it. During the subsequent journey, Xiao Yang would basically focus his mind and allow his soul to merge with the bone-chilling flame. Under this endurance and hard work of his, the resistance within the bone-chilling flame swiftly became weaker with each day. Xiao Yang shut his eyes and sunk his mind into his body on the enormous snake back. Even his breathing had become much weaker. The fire seal between his brows slowly emitted a faint glow while he breathed. Nalan Yanran and Qing Lin by the side turned their eyes away after glancing at this situation of his. They had basically already gotten used to this act of Xiao Yang during this period of time. When these two people turned their eyes away, Xiao Yang's tightly shut eyes trembled slightly. The fire seal between his brows suddenly emitted a glaring fire glow. In the next instant, the fire seal appeared to have been revived. It slowly wiggled and actually seeped into Xiao Yang's skin. Finally, it disappeared. This sudden unexpected change had also caused Nalan Yanran and Qing Lin to be startled. Before they could speak, Xiao Yang's tightly shut eyes were slowly opened. His dark black eyes currently had a dense white flame burning within it. At this moment, the resistance within the bone-chilling flame had actually been completely refined and removed by Xiao Yang, Dense white flame filled both of Xiaoyang's eyes. It was a long while later before they slowly paled. Following the disappearance of the flame, his eyes also once again recovered its clearness. A turbid vapor was being exhaled from Xiaoyang. His face was covered by a layer of faint fluorescence. There was a joy that could not be hidden vaguely present on it. He had never expected that he would actually be able to successfully remove the resistance within the bone-chilling flame towards him within this short dozen over days. Currently, the bone-chilling flame has already completely merged with me. It can be swallowed any time. Xiaoyang's revealed an expression of deep thought. The time needed to refine and swallow the bone-chilling flame would definitely be quite long. If one counted the time of their journey, they should be arriving at the flower sect soon. It was clearly not the best time to swallow it now. I should wait for Yun Yun's matter to be settled before swallowing and refining it. Xiaoyang made up his mind and relaxed. He suppressed the fiercely burning bone-chilling flame between his brows before turning his gaze towards Nalan Yanran by the side. He asked, "How long more will it be before we can reach the flower sect?" "It should be within these 2 days. We have already entered the northeastern area and are close to the flower sect." "Yes, Qinglin, increase the speed a little and try to reach the flower sect as soon as possible." Xiaoyang nodded slightly while his eyes turned towards Qinglin and said. As they became increasingly closer to the flower sect, there was a kind of anxious feeling vaguely present in his heart. He wondered just how that person, whom he had not met for many years, would be like now. Qinglin by the side also smiled and nodded. Her small hand patted the snake back under her. That snake figure shook and the speed at which they shuttled through the sky was suddenly increased. 3 days later, Xiaoyang's trio, who were weary from the travel, had finally slowed down while they were in air above a mountain range that stretched endlessly. Nalan Yanran's eyes swept in all directions. Finally, she slowly landed. A flower petal-shaped thing shot out from within her storage ring. That flower petal-shaped thing had just shot out when it entered the space in front of him. A strange ripple was emitted from that space. A moment later, an enormous spatial barrier appeared in front of Xiaoyang's group's eyes. Such a large spatial barrier, what grandness! A surprise also flashed across Xiaoyang's eyes when he saw this spatial barrier. This flower sect might not possess the strength to create a realm, but this kind of technique to use a spatial barrier to hide the location of the sect did not appear insignificant. The spatial barrier slowly fluctuated. Immediately, it split apart and formed a spatial crack line. Nalan Yanran beckoned Xiaoyang and Qinglin. After which, she took the lead to walk in. Qinglin hurriedly kept the 9 serene deep-ground python and swiftly followed her with Xiaoyang. Their eyes were dazzled when they entered the spatial barrier. A kind of unusually dense flower fragrance came pouncing at them. The interior of this kind of flower fragrance vaguely appeared to be filled with an extremely powerful natural energy. What a mysterious place. Xiaoyang was in the midair. He looked at this world that was hidden behind the spatial barrier. A surprised gasp and expression appeared on his face. An endless number of flower mountains appeared in front of Xiaoyang's group. These mountains were filled with bright-colored flowers. Looking from a distance, it appeared just like a sea of flowers. When a breeze blew, the beautiful flower petals would dance in the sky. This scene appeared just like paradise. How beautiful. Qinglin's face was intoxicated as she muttered while looking at this paradise scene. This sea of flower should be a formation of sorts. Xiaoyang's watched this sea of flower that spread to the horizon. A ripple appeared within his eyes. He could sense that this sea of flower hid an extremely majestic energy. Even the flower petals that danced in the sky vaguely had a kind of special mysterious orbit. Nalan Yanran nodded when she heard Xiaoyang's words. She smilingly said, "This is the sect protecting formation of the flower sect. If one does not have a method to enter it, one will end up getting lost in this sea of flower. A person will be forever trapped inside without anyone to lead him. These flowers should be ecstasy flowers, right?" Unexpectedly, there is actually so many of this kind of extremely rare flower in the outside world in this place. Xiaoyang sniffed the flower fragrance in the air and said, "It does not completely consist of ecstasy flowers. There are also some strange flowers that can be used to greatly strengthen the effect of the ecstasy flowers." Nalan Yanran smiled slightly. Her words had just sounded when a faint gong sound was vaguely emitted from within the sea of flowers. This gong sound, the match is about to begin. Quick, follow me. Do not take a wrong path. Otherwise, you will end up being lost within this sea of flowers. Nalan Yanran's expression changed slightly when she heard this gong sound. She immediately urged with her words. Her body moved and she rushed towards the sea of flowers. Her flying path was quite strange. It was not a straight line. Instead, it took a couple of curves. Xiaoyang and Qinglin, who were behind, let out a bitter laughter when they saw this. They could only hurriedly follow Nalan Yanran's flight path and swiftly gave chase. There was an extremely majestic mountain range at the end of the sea of flowers. Clouds lingered on the mountain. Fresh flowers adorned it. Most of these perilous cliffs had some buildings standing on them. One could vaguely see some alluring figures and hear the laughter of ladies. There was a towering mountain standing at the middle of the mountain range. The mountain was extremely wide. Numerous buildings stood on it. The top of the mountain was an enormous square that spread apart. The square was built using green rocks. There were images of flower petals around it while an unusual fragrance lingered. At this moment, there were quite a number of figures standing around the square. Their eyes looked towards the square and the atmosphere was quite serious. A man and a woman were standing on the middle of the square. The woman was wearing a graceful dress. There were flowers sewed using golden threads on the clothes. At a glance, it seemed that her status was quite high. She also possessed quite a great appearance. However, her somewhat thin red lips vaguely revealed a meanness. A man was standing lazily beside this woman. His hand was holding onto a fan with beautiful women drawn over it. This man was tall and possessed a handsome face. There was an evilness vaguely being emitted from him. A fresh blood-like bright red spot between his brows had caused this evilness to be magnified by countless number of times. Yun, time's up, you should reveal yourself. When the gong slowly sounded, the long eyes of the gracefully clothed woman also narrowed slightly as she coldly cried out. A rushing wind sound was emitted from the midair when the cry of this gracefully clothed woman sounded. Immediately, a white figure gently drifted over. After which, his legs gently landed on the square. When the white figure landed on the square, all of the eyes present turned towards her. Even though it was not the first time seeing her, a surprised expression still surfaced in the eyes of many. The woman in the square was wearing a white blouse and skirt. Dark black ink like long hair were scattered down like waterfall and reached her waist. That extremely beautiful appearance appeared just like a flower fairy in the mountains that did not bother about the mundane and was filled otherworldly enchantment. When both of her eyes rotated, they seemed to possess a clarity that seeped deep into one's bones. There was not the slightest desire to compete. Such a woman can only be described by two words. Peerless bearing. Who else could possess such a bearing other than Yun, who had been separated from Xiao Yang for many years? The few years had caused her to be just like the wine that was brewed deep underground, causing her to be increasingly intoxicating. It even gave one the impulse of not waking from the intoxication. That comfortable cloud-like elegance caused quite a number of elders within the flower sect to quietly nod their heads. No wonder the sect chief would hand over the position to Yun before she died. Just on this point alone, there was clearly a great gap between these two women. The evil-looking man beside the gracefully dressed woman had a fiery hot expression flashing across his eyes when he saw the white-dressed woman. Such an exquisite beauty had a lethal allure towards someone who loves beauty like his life. The eyes from around the place that had suddenly gathered onto Yun also caused the gracefully clothed woman to tighten her hand. A deep jealousy flashed across her eyes. She coldly laughed. I thought that you will not dare to come today. Sect chief, I do not have any desire for the position of sect chief. Why must you force me in such a bitter manner? Yun knitted her brows slightly. She looked at the aggressive, gracefully dressed woman and said, if you wish to remain safe, you should hand over the previous sect chief's dochi. This sect leader has kindly accepted you back then. It is unexpected that you actually dare to try and lay your fingers on my flower sect's chief position. The gracefully dressed woman coldly cried out. If I was aware that Granny Hua was the chief of the flower sect, I would not have rescued her. Yun shook her head and softly said, as for that dochi seal, it had been left behind in my body by Granny Hua. If you really want it, you can come and get it. Do you really think that this sect chief is afraid of you? The gracefully clothed woman laughed coldly. Immediately, she glanced at the evil man, only to see that the latter was staring at Yun. A fury immediately surged within her heart as she cried out, Yaro Liang is like a lover, attack with me. Yun, you possess the inheritance of the old sect chief. I think that you should have no problem fighting two alone. You are also aware of the flower sect's rules. A couple can fight together. The gracefully clothed woman turned her eyes towards Yun and laughed coldly. Do not say that I am bullying you. If you have a companion, you can also call him along. The brows of quite a number of flower sect's elders were knitted slightly when they heard these words from the gracefully clothed woman. A slight smile appeared on Yun's face. She slowly shook her head and softly said, Sect chief can just attack. I do not. Before Yun had finished speaking, a rushing wind sound was suddenly transmitted from the sky. Immediately, a figure hurried over from the distance with lightning-like speed. Within a couple of flashes, the figure had already appeared beside Yun on the square. After which, the figure grabbed Yun's hand in front of many stunned eyes. At the same time, an extremely nauseating teasing voice sounded, causing Yun's face to redden almost instantly. Little Yuna, I'm not late, am I? This video will end here.